Hello and happy Wednesday. We are halfway back to being together, which means we are halfway done with distance learning for now. So I'm excited that we've made it this far and that we're so close to being back in class together again. I'm going to just keep on going with the poets that we would have been talking about in class. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the poet that we are going to be reading from next, and that is Emily Dickinson. She's a very, very interesting individual. So like we talked about before, a lot of our authors kind of had some pretty interesting and or tragic lives, and she is no different. So Emily Dickinson was born in 1830. She was born into a super wealthy and very prominent family. She was educated at an academy her grandfather had founded that was an all-female seminary. So at 17, she went to college and also went to another all-female seminary. And in the spring semester, she became very, very ill of her first year, and so she never went back to school again. She really never left home after that point. She would leave for short trips, but for the remainder of her life, she was pretty much always in her home. Many people believe that she was agoraphobic. And I want to see if I can pull it up to give you a visual of that, but I don't know if I'm going to find one. So to be agoraphobic means that you have an extreme or irrational fear for entering open or crowded spaces. So she was afraid of leaving her own home. She was afraid of being places that had lots of people, which is just very interesting, okay? So we don't know a lot about her other than that she spent a majority of her time at home. So Dickinson in love. So just like all of our poets, she had an interesting love life as well. So she has a set of letters called the Master Letters, and she talks about this unknown man. We believe it was probably her reverend because he was one of the only people who would stop into her home. So there's a potential that they could have been about him. It also could have been her editor, whose name was Samuel Bowles. However, we're not sure. But now what we believe is most prominently probably what it was is that we believe that Dickinson was very interested in other females instead. And she delivered that through these male characters in her pieces. So she had siblings, and it's believed that her and her sister-in-law had some type of love affair together. She was one of the only ones that would have come to her home. So her love life is a little interesting. Why is she weird? Most people think that Emily Dickinson is a little weird because she was known for being a recluse. Like I said, she never left her house. Literally for any reason after 1860, she never left her home. She was also known by a lot of people as the woman in white. I'm going to show you finger puppet Emily Dickinson. She's going to read your piece to you in a second. But literally only wore white ever. And she was kind of creepy. So she was either known as the woman in white or the Belle of Amherst. Amherst was the academy she would have gone to as a student. And she was beautiful. She had lots of friends. But many believed that the reason that she became such a recluse stemmed from the many deaths of her closest friends when she was growing up. So during the time that she would have been in high school, she lost 12 of her friends. Whether that be to sickness or other types of ordeals that would have gone on during that time period, it would not be easy to have any of that take place. So her poems and poetry are very interesting. She kind of has a very alternating tetrameter and trimeter. Often her first and third lines rhyme and her second and fourth lines rhyme in type of iambic pentameter. She also uses dashes in place of a lot of where we would have used periods now. So I'm reading all of this off of our PowerPoint that I'll also post for you to be able to read. So her publishing career. So she ended up sending her poems to a literary critic and family friend. He recognized that she was talented, but always wanted to improve everything that she wrote. So she ended up losing interest. She ended up only having 7 of her pieces published while she was alive, barely. And it wasn't until after she died that her poems really got published. And just like Poe, she made a whopping $12 while she was alive. So it's not like she was really very wealthy because of it. She also, on top of being called the woman in white, after she died in 1886, we discovered that she had what's called Bright's disease. It makes people look fleshy and bloodless, and it's usually related to a kidney failure. So she would have looked very pale as well. And then the only reason that her works were ever published is because her sister-in-law, the one that we think now she had some type of love affair with, is the one who took them from her home and got them published. So the piece that we are going to read is called Because I Could Not Stop for Death. This one is also posted on the calendar, so you can go back, but I'm going to have little Emily Dickinson read it to you, okay? So it's called Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain, and we passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, and my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries and yet feel shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. Okay, so at a first read, this piece is a little bit challenging, but I want to go through it again with you all, and I want to be able to go through some of the vocabulary. So if you have it pulled up while you're watching this video, that'll be helpful to you. So in the first paragraph, it says, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. Okay, this is almost personified, okay? Because she could not stop for death. Can we stop for death? Do we just get to pick? No, okay? So because she couldn't stop for death, death came for her, okay? It was time for her to go. And so figuratively and kind of personified, death has stopped for her. It says the carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. So we're gonna imagine Emily Dickinson popping into a carriage, and it's her and immortality, okay? Immortality, if you don't know, would have been just like kind of this idea that, hold on. It would be like we could live forever and we'd have this idea of having eternal life. However, if she is going with death and immortality, we can only kind of picture what's going to happen, okay? So they're in this carriage. It says, we slowly drove, he knew no haste. Okay, so haste is one of the vocabulary words I highlighted up on the top of this piece for you, and haste means hurry. So we slowly drove, he knew no haste. Okay, so death was not in a hurry with her, okay? It says, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. Okay, so they're in this carriage, they're not going quick, and she has put away all of the work and fun that she's had so she can be on this journey with him. It says, we passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain, and we passed the setting sun, okay? So we're watching her kind of watch herself dying. So it's like she's gone back to her childhood. We see the school. We see where children used to play. She can picture herself being at recess. She sees the fields of gazing grain. That's where children would have typically worked. And she sees the sun setting. So it's like we've made it through a chapter. We've watched her childhood come and go, okay? It says, or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown and my tippet only tulle. Okay, so gossamer would have been what most dresses during this time period would have been made of. This is kind of a similar idea of something that they would have worn. So gossamer itself is like a very light and delicate fabric, kind of like silk. And they say tippet, that would have been like an example of a shawl. Maybe some of your grandparents or ladies that you have seen wear like wrapped up in kind of like a blanket type picture in your brain. That's what this gossamer gown and tippet shawl would have been, okay? She says that this shawl she's wearing is made of tulle. We know that tulle is kind of a thin fabric. So if you see like tutus and things like that, that's typically what it's made of. So she says that she's in a very thin dress, okay? And her shawl is also a very thin fabric, okay? So we kind of go back to the beginning. Was she ready for death? Probably not, okay? Because she is not dressed to go on this long adventure. So second to last paragraph, it says, we paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground, okay? So if you are not one who typically takes trips to graveyards, you might not know when she's talking about this section. She says, we paused before a house that seemed to be a swelling of the ground. They will typically use the term swelling of the ground in cemeteries because where that lump is, where people have been buried and they put that dirt over. She says that they're stopping kind of like at a house that would have been at the front of a cemetery. Okay, she says the roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. A cornice would have been like a decorative molding on a wall. So it could have been like a headstone. It could have been a wall physically itself. If she's saying that she sees this house swelling of the ground, some types of, I don't want to call it a tomb because I don't want you to think of like mummies and stuff, but They'd be kind of raised like this out of the ground, and they were a place that people would be buried above ground, specifically in areas where it was prone to flooding because bodies would raise, okay? So we can kind of picture that she sees like a house that someone who's passed away would be placed in, okay? Last one. It says, since then 'tis centuries and yet feels shorter than the day, I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. Okay. So she says it's now been centuries since she started this journey, and it feels so much shorter than the day that she got picked up by death. Okay. She says that she first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. She says she's just now realizing that when death came for her, she was going towards forever. Okay, she was going towards her death. Where she was going wasn't going to be someplace she was coming back from. So kind of powerful. A weird thing to talk about is death, but I could not stop for death is pretty easy. So on the calendar today, I want you to answer the 5 questions. That's it, that are over the piece. How is the speaker unprepared for death? You could talk about her outfit. The second one is, how does the author use words with positive connotations to describe the speaker's feelings about dying in eternity? Okay, if she is slowly watching her life, there's tons of scenes that you can just pick one and give me a couple lines. Third one is, how does she romanticize death in the poem? Okay, is she making death sound scary while we're reading this? No, okay, she's making it kind of sound like it's a journey to get there. I mean, she's getting to relive her life on the way. 4 says there's a heavy dose of symbolism in this poem. For example, Dickinson symbolizes youth in the lines. You would literally just copy and paste the lines that talk about school, okay? And then you give me another example of symbolism, whether that be a visual of her gown. You could symbolize this tomb in the house by the cemetery. That's kind of up to you, okay? I do want you to also type in the password, which is right below number 5. And our password for this one is going to be puppet, okay? Because we got finger puppet Emily Dickinson. If you guys have any questions, please shoot me an email and I would love to help you. I hope to see you guys soon.